everybody will start laughing uproariously. Chale, ushui die, misrukra, then they'll start laughing uproariously. To cut a long story short, I have a theory of what this social laughter means. But the laughter is a form of safety. The reason why we laugh uproariously on grounds of completely ridiculous and inane remarks is because we want to certify the location of our social encounters as safe. The function of social laughter in Ghanaian culture is similar to hello. When you pick up the phone, the first thing you say hello is hello. Hello means I'm here to listen to you. Let's talk. Now, these three things that I've illuminated are also parts of the commonplace every day, what we take for granted. So my request is also to pay attention to what is right before us, because right before us is what are the building blocks of our reality and what make us feel Ghanaian. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kwesen. I'm very sorry that we're out of time. Thank you very much, Professor Kwesen. I'm very sorry that we're out of time because I truly enjoyed that and I would have liked to hear more fully the discussion on music. I will try to sneak that in the discussion so you can tie the ropes together for me. That was very enjoyable. I have lots of personal memories that were triggered by your conversation. And the idea of Ghanaianness and the feelings of Ghanaianness are something that I have actually been thinking about quite a bit in the past 5 years. I think my attachments to Independence Day grew stronger when I started doctoral work and started reading colonial documents. And so since then, what it means to be Ghanaian, how it feels as a Ghanaian has become a thing of great interest in the last decade to me. So we'll come back to the great insights of your presentation, sir, in a short while. Let me introduce my second speaker, Professor Akosua Adomako Ampofo, who as a feminist myself is one of my heroes. And often one's heroes aren't very nice people when one encounters them. So I'm very happy to report that when I met Professor Akosua Adomako Ampofo, I was thrilled to discover she's also a lovely person. So very nice to have you with us, Professor Adomako Ampofo. So Adomako Ampofo is the Emerita Professor of African and Gender Studies at the Center for Gender Studies and Advocacy at the University of Ghana, where she was its foundation director from 2005 to 2010. From 2010 to 2015, she was the director of the Institute of African Studies, also at UG. She's a founding member and the immediate past president of the African Studies Association of Africa. She's a fellow of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences and the 2025 Claude Aki Chair at the Nordic Africa Institute and the Department of Peace and Conflict Research at the Uppsala University in Sweden, where she focused on chronicling autobiographical stories of justice work as a strategic methodology for peacemaking and healing. Professor Adomako Ampofo's work integrates critical theory with artistic expressions, highlighting the transformative power of the arts in advocating for marginalized voices, something that is underappreciated, I must say, in Africa in particular. The impact of that is underappreciated. So Professor Adomako Ampofo's work is really quite seminal in that area. Her research interests include African knowledge systems, especially decolonizing knowledge and praxis, the politics of higher education, women's work, Black masculinities, sexualities, and popular culture. In 2010, she received the Sociologists for Women and Society's Feminist Activism Award. She considers herself an activist scholar and is a member of networks and coalitions like the Network for Women's Rights Ghana, NetRight. Professor Adomako Ampofo has served as editor, co-editor for Ghana Studies, the Contemporary Journal of African Studies, Critical Investigations of Humanitarianism in Africa, and Africa Studies Review. She has served on several advisory boards and is currently serving as the chair of the Africa Multiple Cluster of Excellence at the University of Bayreuth, chair of the governing board of the African Coalition for Academic Freedom, headquartered in Ghana, and president of the scientific committee of the multilingual journal Global Africa. In 2024, she co-founded 715 House Productions with her daughter, Akosua Asamoah Bia Ampofo, dedicated to shaping narratives about global Africa through storytelling. Professor Ampofo will today be looking at gender identity and social transformation, and I encourage you to relax into it as you watch her work, her magic as she brings art, gender, social sciences together. Professor Ampofo, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Mame, and no pressure from you. So this morning, after I'd gone through my morning rituals, and thanks to Atu for setting the stage for us, you can't help feeling hungry and then wanting to dance after you listen to Atu. I was almost walking on Oxford Street. Anyhow, after I'd gone through my morning rituals this morning, my quiet time, my stretches, I turned on my phone, and of course, there were the usual congratulatory Independence Day messages from family, friends, and colleagues at home and abroad. I exhaled as competing emotions of gratitude for all that I can enjoy, all the things that make us feel Ghanaian, as well as the pain at all that we could be, grappled for space in my head. My red funeral kaba that I'm wearing today, and then this scarf. I hope that you can all see the scarf. This scarf was from Ghana at 50, celebrating our independence. So they reflect my schizophrenic feelings. I'm hearing Nkrumah say Ghana is free forever at last, and I'm hearing that ubiquitous song, Ghana Land of Free Nob. And I'm struggling with this land of great potential. We are ever on the journey with twists and turns, and yet we never seem to be reaching the promised land. Precarity watched live. I want to say a big thank you to Dr. Bright Jemfi and the Ghana Studies Association and all the lieutenants behind the scenes for putting this webinar together. As Atu said, looking really great. And Bright, for me, captures the energy of youth, as well as the multi-belongingness and in-betweenness of Ghana and her diaspora. And he even says, yes, please, like a true Ghanaian. I don't know when please became almost like a placeholder in our conversations, and now we can't talk without inserting please into it. I was born 3 years after independence, with most of my life already lived now, I believe. And looking in my rearview mirror, it'll be easy for me to be despondent. And I do get frustrated and angry and heartbroken. In Ghana, we often pay lip service to the youth, our future, we call them, but rarely do we find out how they feel, what they want, or give them space, except often to exploit their energy for political foot soldiering or religious evangelism. And yet my scan of youth busy living does give me hope. They are not waiting to see economic policy changes that will enable startups. They are entrepreneuring nonetheless. They are not waiting for political party inclusion. They are forming groups to think and plan actions and protests, both online and on the ground. They are not waiting for the state to recognize their amazing creative work and remove the suicide-inducing taxes in the creative sector. They are singing, they are painting, they are acting, they are making films. And our women. A colleague professor at the University of Ghana, a man about my age, recently said to me that when he scans his own walk through the university's history, he sees that at key moments of crisis, it was the women who saved the day, often quietly too busy for fanfare, but often the adult voice in the room when, excuse me, brothers, the men were silent or even reactionary. My colleague even mentioned moments such as the public university bill activism, internal UTAC struggles, and governance challenges with particular vice-chancellors. Please walk with me briefly to 1960. I had a lot to say here, but of course, because of time, I need to trim that down. But I was reflecting on the places and the spaces that I had as a child. Most of them annihilated to gentrification and luxury apartments. Where are the places for young people to play? When I was a child, my father and a few elders in Osu, where we lived, consistently resisted the threat to take up public land that young people needed to play. Today, those places are gone. Where are the elders to advocate for these spaces for the youth? We are expected to see our youth build spaces without the proverbial straw. While the Department of Parks and Gardens sells off parks and gardens across the country to private developers, it takes the activism of groups like eco-conscious citizens, led by a woman, Aula Sewa, to challenge this travesty in the courts. She's abused, she's trolled, and it's just a reflection of the abuse and misogyny that, for me, is on the rise against women, both online and offline. Sexual harassment, brazen sexual harassment, and we can also talk about the underrepresentation of women. In the last 3 elections, we've just moved from 13% to 14.5% to 14.9% representation of women in parliament. And this is even despite the affirmative action law. And the president could have made, if the parties did not field women, the president could have made more appointments, taking the affirmative action law into account. As children, we used to go to Labadi Beach, a paradise of white sand, clear water, coconut trees, so on and so forth. There were young people who were selling. Today, you cannot swim there without getting entangled in black plastic bags whose original content you don't even want to contemplate. Or your senses are assaulted by the competing blasts of loud music. Where's the Environmental Protection Agency? Young men who ply their trade on the beach, selling trinkets or their bodies, are swept away by authorities who care more about an image for foreigners than the livelihood of citizens. I could talk about the corned beef factory in Tamale when I was growing up, the leather factory in Kumasi that made the so-called Achimota school sandals. I could talk about how, as young people, we dreamed of going to Legon Tech and UCC, and COMSO was for those who were going abroad because they couldn't get their chosen fields in the country. So much has changed. I recall a young man a few years ago who asked me if I could help him to get a visa. And I said, where did he want to go? Because I did have a few friends. He said, a visa to anywhere. This is a reflection of the I for left Ghana syndrome that has plagued many of our young people. Our family have 2 young friends who set off to seek their fortunes in Dubai. When we see bodies scattered across the Sahara or drowning in the Mediterranean, that could be them. They only want to live and take care of their families, and now they are stuck in Dubai as we watch unprovoked wars unfold and multilateralism collapse. When my daughters were young and became teenagers, they often asked us why we decided to stay. Some of it was patriotism, yes, a lot of the love and nostalgia that Atu refers to, the sights and sounds, the Hamatan dust, the slightly burnt Kileole oil, clapping, children playing ampe, gutter-to-gutter sounds, Black Stars. Of course, later on, Black Stars consistently broke our hearts, but the Black Queens have continued to do well. And we stayed also because of the sense of freedom, not having to look over our shoulders, not wondering if a door was not open because of the color of our skin or the accent of how we spoke. There was a freedom. And when we said, chale, we didn't have to translate it. And then if we said, chale, we didn't have to translate that either. That was a sense of freedom that sort of crystallizes why we stayed here. And of course, we were also big fish in small bowls. It has been rewarding to be part of or associated with the women's movement, groups such as Net Rights, the Domestic Violence Coalition, the Affirmative Action Coalition, and see the passage of these processes into law. And also to see a comprehensive document like the Women's Manifesto produced, even though the political parties only pay lip service to it. There are 2 sets of things that I want to say today. The second I will leave for the Q&A, hopefully, which is about how we can work together, those of us here and the abroad people in the diaspora. The second set of comments that I will conclude with is the work of young people in the arts. And I would like at this moment if the slide that I had previously shared could be put on the screen, because these are young artists whose work I want to highlight as, as a picture of the spaces in which arts are providing healing and are doing research. Do we have the slide? Or shall I go ahead without it as I conclude?
We have posted a slide.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry, I could not see it. So the 4 individuals groups that I am looking at are Drama Queens, which is an under 30 youth-led collective of young feminists who use performance, audiovisual art, and community-based organizing to challenge the status quo. And you can see them on your slide. Then there's Poetra and Black Girls Glow. By the way, Poetra has a performance tonight that you can see on your slide, Makola Queens, that you should really go and see. It's showing at 8 o'clock. She describes herself as a storyteller, and her work with Black Girls Glow and other initiatives addresses social and economic issues affecting youth and women, particularly sexual harassment, sexual autonomy, sexual anatomy, consent, menstruation, and so on. And this has been done in schools. Our two men that I highlight are Chief Mumin. Most of you will know him, a spoken word and performance artist. His first piece that really hits was Ogbejeke. The name speaks for itself. Chale, we've come from far and we have far to go. Since 2018, he has been showing Mansa World. It has shown in about Mansa Musa, the Mansa Musas, I should say. It has been shown in 9 international shows so far: Egypt, Bahamas, Geneva, Algeria, Nigeria, Barbados, and we'll be showing again at home. And then the last artist is Ibrahim Mahama, who stands out in the contemporary art scene. He has been named #1 on one of the lists so far, and he's a skilled storyteller through his work, an innovative artist, best known for his large installation art, which is impressive and has been showcased in every possible big international space and brings us fame. But I am most touched by his community work at Savannah Center for Contemporary Art, as well as at Red Clay, and recently he has opened in Nkrumah Volini. And this is where the young, the forgotten, become visible, seen, and heard. I use these 3 hopefully to bring our work full circle and to advocate with us, the here people and the abroad people, to see how we can ignite these intergenerational and intergender healing and building of relationship spaces. And I have a number of suggestions about how we could do that, and hopefully we can return to that in the conversation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Akusi-Adomako-Ampofo. I told you will see the arts work with the realities in her work. And of course, she made me think about a lot of my own experiences as an African woman who has worked in male-dominated spaces in the academy here, in the academy abroad, and much of what she says resonated at a very personal level. Particularly, I was thinking about the importance of contributing to work here. And I remember my son's asking me once that if I had got a chair at Yale at the same time as I got the Ashesi offer, which would I have taken? And I was happy to be able to say completely confident that I would have taken the Ashesi job. The opportunity to start a law program with our concerns, our needs, our future in mind, versus to be a member of a fantastic and amazing, eminent panel elsewhere, and perhaps have less capacity to impact the small ball from which I originate. I think the competition was not a very tough one. And I'd like to thank Professor Adomako-Ampofo for reminding us of the importance of the small balls, of the satisfaction of contributing to the small balls from which we originate. For our audience, please note that you can ask questions through our Q&A function. Please type it out so that we can manage our time as we get your questions through. This webinar is being streamed by our media partners and can be seen it's live on Facebook, and it is streaming live on JoyNews, Asasi TV, and several other media partners. Our thanks to them, and you're invited to join us in this conversation through those media if you cannot join us on Zoom. Thank you, Professor Adomako-Ampofo. We will come back to you in the conversation, and some of your work and some of Professor Kwesi's work tie together so nicely. You're quite right. One always wants to eat and dance, but also one is filled with the hope of the energy of our youth, despite its lack of support as a demographic. Let me introduce my third speaker now. My third speaker is Professor George Bob-Milliar. Professor Milliar is Associate Professor at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Kumasi, Ghana. where he has served as chair of the Department of History, Political Science, and Public Administration. And he has served as the director for the Center for Cultural and African Studies. His research focuses on African politics, political economy, democratic theory, the history of development, and political ecology. His work has appeared in leading journals, including African Affairs, the Journal of African History, and so forth. And he has received support from institutions like the European Research Council and the British Academy. He has also provided policy briefings to international organizations and governments and currently serves on several editorial boards, including as co-editor of African Affairs. Professor Bob-Milliar will be speaking to us today on the political and historical dimension of our independence. And he'll be just talking to us about how our independence has been continuously negotiated and renegotiated through political contestation. Professor George Bob-Milliar, thank you for joining us, and please do share your work with us.
Thank you very much, Mami, for the introduction. And let me thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share this very important platform with my mentors. Professor Ampofo taught me at IAS. Professor Atukwesin gave me my very first journal article when he sent very useful comments, and I'm very grateful. Yes, of course, when Bright contacted me, he asked that my reflection should be on things that I've worked on, and I've been thinking of what I could reflect on. But in the past 2 years, I've been working on a number of projects. And one of the projects that I'm working on looks at the development of political organizations in Africa. And in the course of trying to make our work relevant, we did a number of presentations at many places. And at one particular place, the audience were not too keen about what we're presenting when it came to political parties. And one particular participant asked, why are you forcing to study political entities that do not exist? That in the context of Africa, one cannot study political parties. They don't exist. What they see is politics that does not make sense. Of course, I pushed back as a Ghanaian, and I said, well, Ghana appears to be a model, and that in Ghana, party politics plays a major role. So as we celebrate 69 years of independence, and as a student of politics and history, I would like my reflection to be based on party politics. Of course, during the Q&A, I can answer questions bordering on other stuff. But for now, what I would like to reflect on is to recall history. That between 1951 and 1956, that moment was very crucial in the evolution of party politics as we know it today. Of course, it was an experimental phase by the colonial authorities, but that in the course of that period, political parties emerged, and that the party that eventually led Ghana to independence, according to all students of politics and history, was the most organized. All right, and that the foundation for political ideologies and traditions were laid down during that era. And as we speak today, we see some continuities from that era. Of course, there are changes. But what is important is that political parties have been at the center of the nation-building project in Ghana. They've been at the center of the nationalist aspirations to modernize Ghana. And because of this reason, we cannot dismiss them. They are very relevant. During the independence movement and after independence, we still see them. Electoral democracy, as we know it today, therefore, is a continuation of what the nationalists were trying to envisage. At the same time, we've seen several attempts at trying to institutionalize liberal democracy in Ghana. Earlier attempts have not been successful. What we now have and what I like to brag about as the Ghanaian model is the fourth attempt at trying to institutionalize liberal democracy. And that fourth attempt appears to have endured. But according to several authoritative bodies that tries to measure democracy globally, that there is democratic decline across the world, and Africa is not spared, and Ghana is not spared. We see in the current context that there's an attempt to de-democratization, and that what is taking place across the globe is civilian autocratization of the state, where civilians who have accessed power through a democratic process have become very authoritarian. Many scholars have singled out political parties as a culprit, that yes, political parties have contributed to what scholars are calling a democratic backsliding, democratic decline, and that the evidence shows that it's the civilians who have attempted through their own policies, actions. We see the recent example of an attempted coup in Benin, that yes, it was a civilian regime that's still in power that attempted to introduce reforms that have invited the military to come into the civilian space. But despite all of these challenges, we can still credit political parties for having given Ghana that model that Ghanaians like to talk about, that the past 3 decades have consolidated Ghana's democratic achievement, has institutionalized multi-party politics, and that political parties have played a major function. They provided the space for us to practice representative democracy. Political parties have aggregated citizens' interests. Again, they've encouraged citizens and they've mobilized citizens to be part of the democratic process. This is a major achievement. Of course, questions can be asked of the quality or the strategies that Ghanaian political parties have used to mobilize citizens. Again, in the Ghanaian context, they provided a link for citizens to have direct contact with their representatives and state officials. Not only that, again, is the parties that have provided the leadership that has governed this country, and that the structures that political parties have put in place increasingly have developed leadership that, of course, questions can be asked of the quality of the leadership, but overall, leaders have emerged from the ranks of political parties that have delivered. And you can uniquely, in the Ghanaian context, we now see the extension of political parties to overseas branches. Ghanaian political parties are well represented in the Ghanaian diaspora, that there's an inclusion of Ghanaians living outside the country. These are all issues that are very important if you look at political parties in the Ghanaian context. But that is just one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that, yes, political parties have contributed to the democratic stagnation that we are witnessing in Ghana. It appears Ghana's democracy that we tout as a model has stagnated is because of the actions of political parties. Governing political parties have captured the state. State institutions have totally been overrun by political parties. It's almost becoming impossible for many of these state institutions to function effectively without the involvement of political actors. That all of these contributes to corroding the democratic processes that we like to tout. But of course, what is important, and what I would like to conclude with, is that in the Ghanaian context, and we celebrating 69 years of independence, that political parties have always been very central. They are part of Ghana's DNA. And that from the word go, the civilian administration that we have in place is a product of political mobilization. And of course, there are challenges, but the process is still very legitimate. And Ghanaians have shown through several rounds of surveys that liberal political system is what Ghanaians have embraced. And that is what would bring about the development that the citizens are looking up to. I'll end here and thank you so much for the time. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Bob-Milliar, for reminding us of the role of political parties in our historical journey. I'll be coming back to you in our discussion to look at how these political parties have changed over time and whether their changes mirror the changes in our societies, demographics and culture. But I was thinking about political party journeys as you were speaking, and I couldn't help thinking of the number of political parties that have come and disappeared in the course of several elections. And I'd like your thoughts perhaps on why that was. How is it that we have come to a place where we effectively have two political parties? And also, why is it that despite everybody knowing that these two political parties are the heart of Ghanaian politics, that new parties keep springing up? What does that represent, and what does that speak to about our belief in political parties and what they represent for us as a voice or as a form of expression? Thank you very much for that interesting set of thoughts. I'm going to introduce my final Spark session speaker, and then we will start to have actual conversations. So my fourth speaker is Professor Tracy Mensah. Tracy is an assistant professor. Sorry, my first speaker is also a scholar. Professor Tracy Mensah is an assistant professor at Western Carolina University. She teaches undergraduate survey and thematic courses on early and modern Africa. Her research on Indians and post-colonial industrialization in Ghana has appeared in the Journal of African Economic History, and another on the 1983 famine in the International Journal of African Historical Studies. Tracy lives in Asheville, North Carolina, and focuses on Ghanaian history primarily through social phenomena and architecture. Today, Tracy will be speaking to us on business, social, and urban history. And we'll be looking at how Ghana has negotiated a need and desire for foreign capital and immigrant businesses with its vision of self-reliance in the national economy over time. Tracy, welcome to the webinar, and please.
Thank you, Mami. So I'd like to start with a story. On Saturday, June 10, 1939, West Africa, which is a distinguished weekly magazine published from London, reported this news, and I quote, "The first Indian family to settle at the Gold Coast arrived recently. Mr. K.W. Matani of Matani Brothers intends with his wife and 4 children to live in Accra, for he says the climate is healthy to Indians and like that of parts of India. Mr. Matani partly attributes his decision to live in the colony to hospitality experience on previous visits. His 2 elder children are expected to go to Wachimota as soon as arrangements can be made," unquote. K.W. Matani had been living on the Gold Coast between 5 to 10 years before bringing his family over. He died in 1982 in Mumbai. 61 years later, in 2000, the grandson of K.W. Matani wrote back to the magazine with a family update, and he said this, quote, "Having arrived in 1930, we are happy to note that our family business celebrated its 70th year of existence in Ghana on September 20. Government officials, members of the diplomatic corps, and very distinguished guests attended the party. The family is strong, the company still exists, and we are the 3rd generation of Matanis in the country in charge of our business, while those of the 4th generation are attending school in Ghana," unquote. The grandson over here is Mahesh Matani. He's the director of the Stallion Group of Companies. The Daily Graphic featured this history in an interview with Mahesh in January 2018 to mark Indians Republic Day celebrations. Mahesh's father was enrolled at the Bishop Boys School, now Holy Trinity Church School on High Street, where he completed his education up to Standard 7. His name was Pritam Kundamal, but he became known as PK for short among the students. In the 1940s, PK and his sisters were the first Sindhi children to attend school in the Gold Coast. It was at Bishop Boys that PK met and cultivated lasting friendships with prominent Ghanaians, including Peter Alajete and Edward Akufo-Addo. And from an early age, he was groomed in the family's retail business and spearheaded their transformation from retailing to wholesaling and manufacturing from the 1960s under Nkrumah. Piquet was the first Sindhi to voluntarily naturalize as a Ghanaian in the early 60s. When I interviewed Piquet in 2022, he recounted in impeccable garb how daring the decision to naturalize was at the time. He revealed how he also acquired residential properties in Asylum Down and also at Ring Road. And in addition to running the family business, he served as president of the Indian Association of Ghana. Piquet and his family developed a close relationship with the Ga community, employed many Gans in the family business, and engaged in social responsibilities to some Ga communities when the occasion arose. His son Mahesh was born in 1959 at Eswar Ridge Hospital. Piquet died and was buried in Accra 2 years ago in March 2024. The Matani family is one of few Sindhi families with a long-standing presence in Ghana well into the present time, going into the 4th and 5th generations now. The other families are the Daswanis, the Kupchandanis, owners of Melcom, the Gokaldas, and the Nankanis. This vignette of the Matani family's history that I just recounted is relevant to ongoing conversations and debates in Ghanaian public and political spaces about identity, belonging, and citizenship. There are questions like, who is a Ghanaian? How do we define a Ghanaian citizen? What makes one a Ghanaian? These current discussions evokes the historical moment in 1957 when both opposition members and the CPP equally debated on what it means to be a Ghanaian. The CPP government argued that guaranteed birthright citizenship alone was inadequate because some people born in Ghana at the time or living there were only there because it served their purposes. In other words, Ghanaian citizenship should only be for those with, quote, proper Ghanaian heritage, or, quote, persons who can be said to be of true Ghanaian descent, unquote. Members of the opposition in the NLM thought this was unfair to anyone born in Ghana or the British, any other British colonies, and all has been a resident in Ghana for a long time. And by these we mean West Africans, Indians, and also Lebanese. But the CPP will go on to pass this act in May 1957. To be clear, what this suggests is that because guaranteed birthright citizenship alone is not enough, especially for those who are considered foreigners, they must demonstrate loyalty to the country. But what are the markers for determining loyalty? Who gets to decide if one's action is loyal to a country or not? This perhaps explains why the CPP framed Ghanaian identity, in addition to the act, as a devout commitment to Nkrumah's agenda. And subsequent governments or regimes will equally make use of this rhetoric. For example, under the PNDC era, a citizen was one who abides by rules and regulations to achieve national objectives, and especially during the farming crisis of 1983. But under Nkrumah, Indians and Sindhis specifically were the driving force of Ghana's local manufacturing industry. From their exclusive enclave at the Exwal Ring Road Light Industrial Area, their factories were at the forefront of making made-in-Ghana goods. But they were also scapegoats at periods of ruptures and crisis, so 1948, 1966, 1969, the long 1970s, and also 1983, mostly because of how they were perceived and still are perceived to not be Ghanaian by descent. Historically, they have been subjected to racialization, which does not consider the in-betweenness of their identity as Ghanaians, which is a Ghanaian Sindhi identity. This identity is forged out of the unique history of their participation in Ghana's economy from the colonial to post-colonial period. They have cultivated affinity to the country through their economic activities and long-standing presence, making themselves an indispensable part of their country. This part of economic part of citizenship has been aided by social integration into their local communities. Ghanaian Sindhi families in Accra, Tema, and Kumasi trace their history to 4 generations and sometimes 5 in Ghana. For most of these families, there's a difference between their great-grandfathers who returned to India and their grandfathers and fathers who have long remained in Ghana and made it their homes and in whose footpaths they follow. They have created lives for themselves in the country and contribute in different ways to the development of the country. The microhistory of Sindhi families also shows how to be a Ghanaian without being from Ghana. And especially now when what it means to be a Ghanaian and who is a Ghanaian continues to animate public and political discourse. At 69, I think our conversations around Ghanaian identity, belonging, and citizenship are as fraught as they were in 1957. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracy. That's an interesting thought. I think we are having this discussion about who is a Ghanaian and what that means at an interesting time when Ghana is offering citizenship to African Americans who are choosing an affiliation with Ghana. And it's interesting that in that discussion, people who live in Ghana and are racially visibly different from us haven't had quite the same journey. I was having a chat with my husband about this yesterday, actually. We were talking about Lebanese people born in Ghana and naturalization in the light of his friend having received citizenship. And I was thinking through this, and it was very interesting to me that a Lebanese person who has lived in Ghana all their lives and speaks a Ghanaian language receives a warmer sort of reception. But in my experience, they're sort of treated as they are like Ghanaians, rather than that they are in fact Ghanaians. And so it's an interesting thought, and we will look at how that connects to the feelings of Ghanaianness that Prof. Kwesi talked about in just a minute. I'd like to say thank you to all my panelists for such riveting Spark Talks. For each of you, I would like to have a full public lecture to hear the depth of the thought that has gone into these compressed versions, because there's just so much there. I think this is a very rich and interesting discussion, and I'm looking forward to the panel discussion that we're going to have in a minute, where we weave together these threads of the different disciplines. But let me say thank you very much at this point for the individual presentations. We will take questions at the end of this session, please. So do keep your questions coming through the chat if you have any, and we will get to them. I'd like to start the discussion with a question for Professor Kwesi. Well, I was thinking when both Professor Bob-Milliar and Tracy were speaking, I was thinking about feelings of Ghanaianness. And I'm wondering, where do these feelings sit in the heart of the Ghanaian who is not of ethnic affiliation to Ghana? You were talking in your presentation about how these feelings, the food culture, for instance, when we eat, we don't eat as Evers or as Gans or as Fantis. We're eating a Ghanaian meal, and it evokes this sense of Ghanaianness and the culture around it, the anticipation, and all of that is part of the experience of Ghanaianness, and it invokes these feelings, which I find actually very, very plausible. When you go to a Ghanaian party, you rarely go to a Ghanaian party that is composed entirely of guests of a single ethnic origin. And so you will find multiple ethnic affiliations represented at any Ghanaian party. And when they eat Ghanaian food, there's no breakdown into ethnic groups as we eat. So I do find that Professor Kwesi's thesis is quite resonant. But how do you think that works for that feeling of Ghanaianness can be shared between non-ethnically Ghanaians and ethnically Ghanaians?
So there's, of course, a long history of the assimilation of what we'll call stranger groups into Ghanaian society. As you know, I've done some work on the Afro-Brazilians of Accra and their process of assimilation. But we also have a large community of Danish Africans, so Afro-Danes. especially around the Osu area. And there's a beautiful history of how the Afro-Danes become assimilated. They become Ghanaian. In fact, Osu, around the Presby Church, if you walk around there, you see lots of place names, of road names that are of Danish vintage, Loco Street or Lutrot Street, and so on. It's all festooned, all these names. So before the Lebanese, the Ghanaian Lebanese or the Ghanaian Indians arrived, there were stages of the assimilation of different, we would call them, and I call them stranger groups because they are not phenotypically Ghanaian or African. They are not black there. Now, each of them has had a different, as it were, entry. And this is not just about the enigmas of arrival, but entry and assimilation. For example, the Lebanese, for a long time, the Lebanese start arriving in Ghana in the late 1880s into the 1990s. And there's a long history connected to the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the division of the province of Syria, of which Lebanon was a part, the splitting out of the province of Syria, and so on and so forth, and their emigration. So they land in different parts of West Africa. For the longest time, the Lebanese practiced what we would describe as endogenous marriages. That is to say, they tended not to marry outsiders. So they may have had relationships with the Ghanaians. I'm talking especially the men to women, but they didn't marry Ghanaians. And this feature of endogenous marriages was very common among the Lebanese as well as the Indians of East Africa. The East African community of indentured laborers who then settle also tended not to marry Kenyans or Tanzanians and so on. Now, this led to a certain tension because the principles of indigeneity, of marrying inside, was also to protect property. So they wanted to marry among themselves so that they'll hand over property. And so for us, the non-Lebanese or non-Indian, they seem to be cultivating an enclave mentality for the longest time, that they're actually creating an enclave. And so even though they spoke our languages, they attended our schools, they ate our foods, they were considered from the outside as living or constructing a separate identity. Now, this also fed into a citizenship debate in the 1960s during Nkrumah's time. The big law cases about how far they could go to give them citizenship or not. The Lebanese provided a test case for our citizenship laws. Of course, now looking back, because there's an alternative history to be told, which is that many Lebanese have had Lebanese and Indian, the Sindhis. Thanks, Tracy, for mentioning the Sindhis. I have a Sindhi friend. He's at the University of Toronto, Girish Daswani, who grew up in Kumasi. And his parents came, they ran jewelry stores. There's another alternative history, which is that they have contributed to, especially commerce. They have contributed to commerce, and there's a whole story to be told. And they are earnestly, like Girish, this Girish guy, you will not meet another more loud-mouthed Ghanaian. The guy's mouth is strong. If you enter an argument with him, he will insult your mother. He will insult you. He will do all that. His mouth is strong. So there's another thread to be told and threaded of how these stranger communities are also strong advocates of the welfare of so enclave on the one hand, and then strong advocates of Ghanaianness on the other.
Thank you, Professor Quayson. I'm going to ask you to give it a few minutes of thought. I'll come back to you on how we can bridge that. If we're going to go forward, including all of our citizens. And as you and Tracy have rightly pointed out, the Ghanaian, Lebanese and Indian Ghanaian populations have actually been quite impactful economically here across history. So perhaps at some point we need to have a conversation, and they need to have a conversation, whether we are indeed one country, and figure out how we're going to bridge that gap. Professor Adomako-Ampofo, you know, when Tracy was speaking, I was thinking of the youth and of our art and of our unsupported spaces. And I was thinking particularly in light of Professor Kwesi's comments about feeling Ghanaian. And I was wondering, does this lack of support for the youth, and you're quite right, our youth seem to thrive in the gaps rather than in the structure of the state. They make do. We have a very cheerful and sort of resourceful outlook. A few Christmases ago, there was a video, I think, that was or a soundbite that went viral, of someone talking about how you don't steal, but you do back, and you make ends meet. Nobody ever really defined what back was, but we all kind of understood that you struggle somehow. You make ends meet, and it's an acknowledgement that the state is not supporting young people in the ways that they should hope for, right? That they have to drag it out of corners and out of the gaps. They have to make an existence. I'm wondering whether you think that this lack of support will create that despondency you spoke about when you look back in that generation, and if that will affect their feelings of Ghanaianness, and if that will erode the entity that when if our youth should have this relationship with the state of existing despite rather than because of. And what do you think we can do about that?
Thanks, Mami. That was a lot. I think we have, you're right, the youth are, and all of us actually, I think we are operating and living in spite of, because we are in this lane. I was going to Cape Coast 2 weeks ago, and I swore that until that road is done, I'm not going again. It's a hazard, right? And then you go on the Tema motorway, and the road is being constructed, and it's not chaotic. There are bollards to show you where to pass. There's lights. There are signs. Why can the construction on the Cape Coast Road not be the same? So it's not like we can't do, right? Anyhow, we've, as many of you have said, we've always lived in chaos and with turbulence. We have built the muscles. I think Black people, African descended people, have generally learned how to survive in spite of the trauma that we also know is traveling intergenerationally. So we have certain skills, but I believe that there's a strong responsibility on my generation to be the advocates, as many young people say to me, speak for us in the rooms that we cannot enter, the spaces that we can be in because of our privilege. Our colleagues in the diaspora can be in because of their privilege, and I don't want to suggest that everybody in their diaspora is privileged. It's not a homogeneous space. But some of us have privilege, and we have power, and we have voice, and we must speak on behalf of, we must push, we must insist, we must be in the spaces and say. For example, right now there's a tax in Ghana on ticket sales for any performance. And the tax is on the gross. It's not on the profit. So if I am a young person and I hire a space, it costs me 2,000, and I pay my band or my artist or whatever, and it costs me another 3,000, and my ticket sales at the end of the day are 2,500. Clearly, I'm going to make a loss, right? Because they're going to tax me on that, and I've not even broken even. I mean, this is such a simple thing to fix. I know the conversation is ongoing. The Minister for Tourism is a former student of ours at the Institute of African Studies of mine. So these are conversations that one can have, and we should have. but there are also young people who are mentoring other people. And so the 4 examples that I showed are all young people who are trying hard, but they're also pulling their junior brothers and sisters with them. They are doing stuff and showing them and telling. Storytelling is so important. I think all of us have talked about storytelling today. The churches do it so well. It's testimony time. Then you come and give your testimony, right? And so you get to know that when you see Professor Atukwesin or Akosua Adomako Ampofo or Tracy or George, it's not like we've arrived, or you, Mami. It's not like we've arrived and we've not had struggles. We've had struggles. And we need to be honest and authentic about them and how we have overcome them. When we did I'm doing a plug here, when we did the self-plug, the documentary When Women Speak, we specifically went after older women. The youngest was in their 60s, to show that, one, women had been feminists since, and that we didn't need, American and European women to come and show us how to do feminism. Many of the young people who watched that film were encouraged, both by the struggles of the women in the film, but also by the history that they learned through these women's stories, which unfortunately we are not teaching history in the schools. But the stories, and I want to underscore the importance of stories. And right now we have multimedia. The stories are encouraging. And the stories are opportunity. I mean, I can have a long list, but, storytelling, whether it's a documentary, if you have money to make one, whether it's short soundbite videos you can do with your iPhone or whatever phone. I'm not doing advertising for Apple, whatever. Do a small one, put it online. TikTok, I'm not on TikTok, but I think there's enough space to do this on TikTok and on IG, to share these stories and to let people know that it is possible. It is possible. And we move in circles, right? Somebody said yesterday in another meeting that sometimes we get weary. In fact, often we get weary. It's like, this work I've done is my bread. But there's always a new group of students in class 1. So you may have taught last year. You shared the message last year, wabre, but new students have come. So you have to start all over again. And then at some point, those of us in the front lines are tired. We move to the back. And the younger people with energy, look at Brighton Company, Kukwa, Manfo, and all of these. Charlie, they have energy. They can do, and they are doing, right? And if they tell us what they are doing, the ones who are in their teens and their 20s will be excited. So let me leave it there, because otherwise...
Mami, let me just jump in very quickly and just emphasize what Akosua has just said about storytelling, stories of different kinds, from different avenues and so on. But the necessity to keep putting them out in whatever forums, these are so important, because the stories that we tell about ourselves also shape how we become as a people.
Absolutely. In fact, when Professor Akosua Adomako Ampofo was speaking, I remembered when my littlest son was very little, there was a period when he was a big fan of Captain America. And I found it irritated me, this desire for my fancy child to be Captain America. And so one day, I made up a superhero called Kipko's Boy. And Kipko's Boy was the sidekick of Captain Ghana. And I would give him a Ghana flag, and he'd wear that as a cape, and he'd climb a burglar proofing in the kitchen. He found it so empowering. I never got around to writing the book of stories about Kipko's Boy that I had intended to, but it was, for me, a very powerful counter-narrative to the overwhelmingness of Captain America. How amazingly correct and powerful, and why wouldn't you want to be American? Why wouldn't New York be the most amazing city in the world for you if you grow up living in that narrative? So I do have to emphasize that as well. It is important that we tell stories that our children can feel tied to, but also aspire to something through. Thank you for that important reminder. Professor Bob-Milliar, I actually have a question for you. And I'm wondering if the political decline that you yourself admitted in the political parties functioning is affecting feelings of Ghanaianness. And as you speak, one of the things I found interesting was that I was thinking of Professor Kweson's thoughts on music. And I realized that political parties tend to run their campaigns with music. This is not necessarily the norm around the world. In many places, there are slogans. But in Ghana, it's Onapo, and we are moving forward. and you know, it says something that even political parties know, that if you're trying to reach Ghanaians, you have to speak in the modes that we speak. And so invariably, there'll be some music. But I'm wondering if the decline in political party outcomes that you admit affects the ability of music to arouse this loyalty to Ghana when we start mixing Ghanaianness and Ghanaian music.
Right.
Thank
you very much. And sorry, I dropped off. It's power outage in Kumasi. Right. Yes. So the decline that I was trying to put on the table is a decline from across. It's not unique to Ghana. It's along almost all. You see that in the United States. You see that in Europe. The decline is across. That political parties generally, democracy is declining because of the actions of governing parties and all of those things. Yes, in the Ghanaian context, we've seen decline again because of the actions or inactions of governing political parties. And the survey that I was referring to, the varieties of democracy, VDEM and Freedom House Index, shows that, yes, it's because of some of the actions of governing parties that Ghana's index has declined. But you're also right when it comes to mobilizing voters. Of course, these parties are local. You cannot mobilize Ghanaian voters or generally African voters employing some of the strategies that are used in many of these industrialized democracies. It won't work. We Ghanaians respond to music. So before a party starts with a program, they will have to play loud music to get people to come and listen to. Even trying to translate their messages that these are policy positions that political parties have. These need to be translated into the local context that they find themselves. So to get people to come and listen to. Even I was getting some feedback from this thing.
But not to cut you off, but isn't that part of the exploitation Professor Demarco was talking about of the youth, that rather than simply, tap into, this is what they respond to, that the political parties should have responded to their concerns rather than simply offer them, musical nuggets?
Yes, political parties behave that way. They will tap into. Everybody sees that. We see what happened in Nigeria in the last election, the Obedient movement, Peter Obi's movement. He saw this energy by the Nigerian youth, and he decided to break out from his party to use that. In Kenya, we're seeing how politicians are trying to mobilize the youth. They do that everywhere because you cannot ignore the youth. All right. Yes, they use them. Even in the last election, we saw Shada trying to mobilize the youth. So they all do that, of course. From the political party's perspective, that is not using the youth, but that is a mobilization strategy. So that we've crafted a policy that resonates with the Ghanaian youth, and the Ghanaian youth will come on board and support our cause. But whether when they access power, they're able to address the youth problem, that's another question that is open for debate.
Mami, can I jump in again just quickly? Sometimes the musicians also create songs that are anti-establishment or anti-political. So there was this song, Sentinel, RG Baby, 2016. And at that time, the NPP was in power. They even tried to take the song to use it for political campaign. But by that time, it was too late. Everybody knew that Sentinel was a critique of politics. So sometimes it cuts the other way, that the youth are sensitized. So the political parties want to use the songs for mobilization, but the youth are sensitized to the potential of mobilizing anti-party or anti-state sentiments through the song. Sentinel is a good example.
You're quite right. I just remember, and the passion that generated when it would be sang, particularly in youthful circles. I had a question for Tracy. I want you to think about, so Ambassador Kojo Choi is sort of the first visual, extremely non-ethnically Ghanaian, Ghanaian public political figure we have. I think there was Joseph, I forget his name, my apologies, and he was Deputy Minister of Sports in the MPP era for a while. I forget his name. He was partly Lebanese.
NDC, Joseph Lamin.
Lamin, DC.
Lamin.
Lamin.
Yeah.
Lamin, NDC government, yes. And these two are essentially the only non-ethnically Ghanaian faces that have been strongly associated with Ghanaian politics. My question was, with all of the investment that non-ethnically Ghanaian Ghanaians demographics have made in the country, why have we not seen more of an interest from them in participation? Political theory is very firm on the importance of participation to achieving to self-actualization within a political demographic, right? And they have the opportunity to participate. Ghana hasn't actually put very many obstacles in the way of people trying to participate in Ghanaian politics. There's no limit on campaign funding. There's no real requirements for being a party member. It's only on standing elections that your citizenship becomes a question. But we haven't seen very much political activism from these demographics. Is it a lack of Ghanaian feeling? Why? What do you attribute to that?
Thank you. But before Lamin and Ambassador Choi, I think I wasn't of age then. But Gobin Nankani, he had worked with Atamels, but didn't get into the role of becoming like the governor for the Bank of Ghana because that didn't go out. If that had happened, he would have been like the first Ghanaian Cindy to be in like that limelight over there. But going back to your question, I think historically, because of these racializations, there's been a way in which Sindhis have kept out of politics specifically. And I mean, speaking to them, they say things like, we are only businessmen or we only do business. And there are ways in which they run or seem to want to influence politics, but doing it through the Indian Association of Ghana. And in the 1980s, for example, there were countless meetings between the Indian Association of Ghana and Rawlings, many times during when structural adjustments were coming up, where they were making like petitions over there about how some of these policies were going to affect like their businesses, and it did. So that's why a lot of those businesses would collapse, like in the neoliberal period, because like the economy sort of like opened up and there wasn't much, there was too much competition for them to do that. So on one end, there is what they sell, what they say about themselves, that we are businessmen, we care about business and our contribution is in the business sector. But there's also the other hand of how they don't seem to be embraced by Ghanaians, and especially when there are moments of economic peril or crisis, which is what that has always been. So in 1948, with the riots, we only think about the European businesses, but the Lebanese and Indian businesses were affected as well, because in Ghana, every light-skinned person is an Obroni. Like, and it doesn't matter. Like, Sindhis do not look like other groups of like Indians, so they don't come across as brown skin. They look light skin, and it's easy for you to think of them as like white people or Obroni, and they do get called that. But when you talk to them, they still have that expressions of Ghanaianness. So P.K. Matani could speak Ga, and I'm not the only one saying this. At his funeral, his doctor did talk about how like the things he says as a Ghanaian, or when he speaks Ga, it has to be like hardcore Ga. You have to be like a hardcore Ga to understand what he's saying. And it shows like, how immersed he had been in the Ghanaian societies. His sons understand Ga, but they don't speak it. Those who grow up in Kumasi, so like the Daswanis, Girish, they also like speak like impeccable Chi and all that. So they have these signs over there. But in Ghana, there's really this hard thing about identity and what we think identity looks like. You have to look like me. But sometimes too, identity about being Ghanaian also means including like, how do you speak? How do you talk? Depending on what you say or how you pronounce water, you're a Ghanaian or an American. Like it's all those like subtle little things over there. So in bringing it back to your question, there are like many things about it. The historical instances where they've been victims of because of their roles in the economy, but also just their reluctance to not want to be a part of that. And I'm not sure if like it's that what really matters, like to want to be in the political space and take political areas, or there are ways in which identity and citizenship and belonging can focus on different things and it's fine.
I'm a constitutional theorist, so I'm going to have trouble agreeing with you that political participation is not an important part of the act of citizenship. It is a critical element of citizenship, because I always ask my students, who should create the state for you to live in? Whose job is it? If you are going to be a member of the community, you should have a sense of responsibility to the community. If you feel that you're only a businessman, in some ways you're saying that you are not a member. You are merely here to benefit, which I think some of the resentment is rooted in, that you have been here a very long time, but you don't want to be a member. So perhaps as we think through what it means to be a citizen, we who are ethnically Ghanaian, it's also a good time for those who are not ethnically Ghanaian, who wish to be embraced as no different a part of the political entity than us, to think about what they contribute to the idea and the feeling and the experience of Ghanaianness. Because we are very actively seeking foreign direct investment, but we're not seeking for those investors to become Ghanaians. Right. So if you're here as a businessman only, in some ways you're looking to fall into our FDI target rather than our citizenship target. I'm going to have to round up this discussion, though I had so many questions.
Sorry, I wanted to add something to what Tracy said. Yes, she's right. In my research, I came across many of these businessmen as non-political, but what I realized is that you will not see them on a political party platform campaigning, but they contribute a lot. Okay, they donate a lot of money to the two major political parties. There's no two ways about that. They'll tell you that we are businessmen, we are not here to do politics. But when you come to party financing, they are those who are supporting the two major political parties. That's a little bit I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you. It'll be interesting to see how much of a contribution they are making, because in that case, they are probably shaping policy far more than we know and see. And it'd be interesting to have a clearer idea of who in Ghana is shaping the direction of Ghana and why they're not including our youth more actively. I wish I had the time to have a conversation with Professor Odomako Ampofo about women in this whole conversation. Women, Ghanaianness, with the oft-quoted statement from Mensa, could you agree? Or Mensa Saba, educate a woman and you educate a nation. This is also true culturally. Women pass on the culture that they live to their children, which means a lot of the feelings of Ghanaianness are created and perpetuated through women, which makes me wonder why misogyny is on the rise. And so it would have been a very interesting conversation if only we had the time to kind of take apart a bit more how women can change the narrative that is being perpetuated about us and how we are contributing to that in negative ways.
Men must be part of the narrative. Finally, the women, we are tired. The men must be part of the narrative. They must do the work too and be proper allies.
You're tired.
Yeah, girls are bred.
My pet.
Agreed. Really agreed.
One of my pet peeves is when I meet a person a man in a professional setting and he calls me dear. It annoys me no end. Where do you know me from? Why are you using endearments? Why aren't you calling my male colleague your dear as well? And it's these little spaces that we don't realize are misogynistic, that create obstacles that need not be there. So hopefully we'll have another conversation, another chance to talk more fully about how people at home, people abroad, men, women, youth, older people can work together towards this journey that is Africanness. Professor Kwesi said about language. I was away out of Ghana at the time that these two expressions became popular, and I found that once I understood them, I felt a desire to assert my Ghanaianness by using them and sort of claiming membership. The expression "I love enter someplace," I love enter Flagstaff Heights. I love enter. When I first heard it, when it first became an expression, I wasn't in the country. And when I finally understood it, every time I had a conversation with someone at home, I made sure they knew that I left entered somewhere. It was almost a subconscious act, but it was reflecting on your presentation, an assertion of membership. The reason why you'll be looking for Pluton in Babylon, really, because you could get just as full on a sandwich.
The thing is that language is also very important. And part of the problem with these communities, Lebanese, Indians, and so on, is that the parents or the grandparents, not the parents, having arrived in the early period, committed themselves to learning Ghanaian languages, eating Ghanaian foods. The kids, not so much. When I was at NYU, an Indian student popped up in my office. She wanted to enroll in my class. She was 18 years old. I remember her vividly. And she said she grew up at Osu. And I was very excited. I said, "Oh, you grew up at Osu?" She told me where she grew up and so on. And then I asked her, "So what do you know about Oxford Street?" She said she had never been on Oxford Street before. I said, "What? You've never been on Oxford Street?" Says her father didn't allow them to go in that area because it was considered dangerous, and they were always had to be chaperoned. They lived like 2 blocks down. Not only that, she didn't speak a syllable of Ga or Chi or anything. To all intents and purposes, she was an expat. Having grown up all her 18 years in Accra at Osu, she was really an expat. That's another problem. That some of these communities, develop the mentality of expats. I mean, why do you need to speak? And I have friends, actually, dear friends, whose children are in the same, these dear mixed race friends who have the similar problem. And it's because they think that their identity is rooted through the other side, so the white side or the Lebanese side and so on. Of course, if you break up your children like that, how can they hope to stand for political positions? Because at the minimum, some phrases, language facility. I'm very fascinated with the Nankani reference, because it's true, some of them were thoroughly immersed. That's not what you see in this gen. In this generation, there's an expat mentality that has taken hold, and which they need to correct if they want to be fully participant in the political sphere. This is not about funding, funding in the background, but to step forward and do it. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you for that thought. Honest conversations are hard, but they are important. And both sides need to be clear on how we are contributing to where we are if we're looking to change direction. So I'm very glad we're having these conversations, both about how ethnically Ghanaians feel about citizenship and who should be entitled, and also about how non-ethnically Ghanaians perpetuate those divisions that make us resistant to the idea of equal membership for those who have chosen to be separate. I think we have a creative interlude, and in the spirit that Professor Adomako Ampofo encouraged us to do, to tell stories, to give our art the support and the chance and the love it deserves, we're going to take a short interlude for some artistic expressions.
Ghana Studies Association, AICO. It's an honor and privilege to be with you on this webinar. March 6, Independence Day. Ghana is 69 today. Ghana in uncertain times is certainly a conversation worth having. My name is Manifest, and today we'll begin by posing a question, and then we'll go further and share a message of optimism in these uncertain times.
This moment is not a headline waiting to happen, it is a question. A question that Sith March always asks of us. What are we doing with the burden of freedom? So let excellence be the thesis of your being. Not the excellence that is deterred by the prospect of losing status when we stand for what we know is right, but the excellence that insists on us being a monarch of our resources. Do not equate indigenous to uncultured. Do not dignify conformist with the privilege of your attention. If your rebellion is not creating new economies, you're doing it wrong. Be a guardian of originality. Be so authentic, it compels another to be patriotic. Be so indispensable, it takes 3 people to replace you. Blessed are the unsatisfied, for they shall be catalysts of change. Blessed are the artists, for they shall create possible futures. Blessed are the quiet revolutionaries, for they shall never be forgotten. Some African dreams are made up of white spaces. But I only dream of being a house pet, dreamt about, planned for, labored for, and orchestrated for a predetermined triumph. Oh, how I dream of landing softly.
I like the line, be so indispensable that it takes 3 people to replace you.
There's Poetra, one of my 4 from Black Girls Glow. Amazing young woman. Please go and see Makola Queens. I'm doing a plug for her. She did not ask me to do this, by the way.
No, Professor Bako, you're doing what they've asked you to do, to be the elders advocating for the spaces. You're talking about there being no place spaces. Just this afternoon, one of my sons was telling me that we drove through cantonments, and he was saying, it's a very developed area. No, he used some diminution. I said, why almost? He said, there's no parks, but it has a lot of fancy houses, but there's just no parks and no sidewalks. And community spirit. So when I was a child, I would spend a month of my long vacation with my grandparents in Kumasi. And a lot of my asantiness was formed in playing on the streets, playing with children in the community. If you go through any of our upper middle class and upper class developments, there is absolutely no incentive for any child to come out and play with their neighbor. They don't know their neighbors. Their walls are high. There's no sidewalks for them to safely walk out of their high-walled compounds to go next door anyway. And so these community games that used to happen spontaneously are now material for children's stories and TV shows about rural Africa. But there was a time when it wasn't only rural Africans who knew their neighbors. If you meet people from the older generations who grew up in Laboni, they knew each other. Who grew up in Canton, they knew each other. There were community things and community spaces. But these days, the higher up you go, the less you know of your neighbors. So there's a lot of things that we need to think about and take intentional steps. Perhaps we can't change our building style, but maybe we could ask who our neighbors were. Maybe we can ask their names, and maybe we can check if they have children our children's age, and we can attempt to build community again as we try to fill the identity Ghanaian with depth, nuance,
So,
and
Mommy,
and
I
texture.
have some thoughts.
Actually, we can change our building style. Yeah, I studied architecture.
Absolutely.
And the building code does not allow you to have these high walls in front of the house, right? And even they are called fence walls. They are not supposed to be higher. In fact, 2 meters is too high. We learned this in feet and inches. So everybody says Ghana has good laws. We just don't implement them. People brazenly break the laws. So if you had these shorter walls, then your neighbor could look over the wall, as I have in my house, and I can chat with my neighbor across the street. He can see me. I don't even have to go out. He's coming out of his house. I see him. Oh, quick word saying. Then we chat for a few minutes or so. Auntie Akosia, we'll go and have lunch together or something. So it is possible. It is possible, but we don't do. And I'm sorry, I have to be leaving in 10 minutes. So if
there's another thing, and that is that progressively the upper middle classes have abolished the need for the outdoors. And the abolition of the need for the outdoor, because the outdoor is actually incorporated into part of living space. So the outdoors is not just lying outside the house. It is part of living space. So, Mommy, what you just said about playing in the neighborhood and so on, it is because the outdoors was conceived of and practically deployed as an aspect of childhood play. The upper middle class, and you can see this phenomenon in the condos that have sprung up all over Accra, which have no play spaces whatsoever. They're beautiful cantonments, airport residential, and so on, but they don't have like dedicated spaces where children might gather or anyone might gather. And this is because the middle classes no longer think that the outdoor is necessary. So that there's a progressive abolition of the idea of the outdoors as being an extension of indoors. Contrast the cantonment that you just mentioned with Jamestown. The Jamestown neighborhood, the outdoors is completely integrated into the indoor domestic sphere. And I completely agree with Akosia. Of course, it can be planned for. That the building code can be planned so that these big, beautiful condos will have dedicated green spaces that will cultivate a communal feeling. So is the middle classes. Also, another thing is that the middle classes have gradually shrunk kinship relations. So that the extended family principle for these upward mobile middle classes is no longer, it has been nuclearized. So kin is nuclear, which is of course Christian, it is Western and so on, as opposed to contrast with compound houses. But anyway, so two things, the abolition of the outdoors as an extension of indoor domestic sphere, and then gradually this nuclearization of the family unit. The condos represent this transformation.
Right. Prof. I have a couple of questions for you since you have to go quite soon. The first from the Q&A session is, how can we include the Ghanaian diaspora in sharing our stories and in correcting or broadening, especially the African narratives about Ghana and Africa as a whole?
Thank you. First of all, I just want to underscore that we have a tendency to do an us and them. And then we do suffering Olympics. We don't have water and we don't have electricity. Well, me too, I'm suffering from racism, right? So those of us here look at the abroad people and they parachute in and come and do Dirty December. And what annoys me personally the most is if I'm on a plane with diasporans and then they are complaining there's corruption. Hey, and Charlie, look at how long I have to wait for my baggage even to clear. Charlie, if I was here, and I'm like, where do you wait for your bags longer than JFK or maybe Dusseldorf Airport, right? So don't come and tell me this kind of thing. Then the resentment begins. And then if you are a here person who also is struggling, and doesn't go away much, and then they come and crowd the space. Christmas now is becoming very annoying for those who live in Accra because it has become a space for the diasporans, whether they are, native Ghanaians or they are from other places. And, a lot of people have written about how African cities have become the party towns for, the rich and powerful elsewhere. It's easy to get into that space. And I think one of the things that we need to do is to have conversations together and to hear each other out, to stop sitting in judgment. It's so easy for us to sit in judgment about each other's needs. And you people, you stayed here and look at what you've let the country become. Well, you people too, you left and you left us. But we were sending you money, but the money you were using it for, it's so easy to get into that vibe. And maybe for us here to think that our siblings in the diaspora don't have challenges, right? Because they don't talk about their challenges. They come back sometimes with a white savior complex, but clad in black skin that we resent in white people. They come to help. And then they become annoyed when we keep on asking for help. It's like, do you think I'm an ATM? But you were dishing out cash when you came. So, of course, I think you're an ATM, right? So we need to be honest with each other and share each other's struggles. And then we can have an agenda and say, what are the 5 biggest things that trouble all of us? Because you people come home because you have that Ghana feeling. And we are here because we have the Ghana feeling, or we can't leave, whatever it is, right? We are here. So we are kind of in the soup together, but not in the same way. What are the 5 big things we want to deal with? I will put the ecocide at number 1 right now, because if we don't deal with the illegal mining, there'll be no water to drink in 5 years. And cleaning the water bodies of the cyanide and the mercury can take, some scientists say, hundreds, almost thousands years. So, right, we can't import water to bath with. Okay, so that's what can we do to put pressure together? I think our current government did a great job of saying, let's revive constitutional review. Where's the report? Why have we not seen the report? We've seen the recommendations. Why have we not seen the report?
This voice speaks a lot of volume to me personally, because I feel like my forefather or my own father was killed here, and it's like a child who didn't meet his father, but you come and you hear that this is where your father was slaughtered, in a sense, or your father was killed. So anytime we come here, we feel like this is the home of our ancestors. Here was the center where the plot to capture Tumfo was initiated, and here was the center where he was captured.
All right, so my name is Daniel Nkrumah. I'm a financial consultant and also the chief steward of the Friends of Purpose in Christ. So the Friends of Purpose in Christ is a group of friends from University of Ghana from 2016 that came together to make impact.
Coming where, she shuttles between people in different places. It's an interesting story. It's a nice way of showing the connections between the here and the there. And financially too, we need help, right? But it doesn't, and we want people to stop thinking that when they've sent money, because we also do things for people here, right? If somebody comes and I spend the whole day taking you to Makola, then to your seamstress, then to here, me to have invested in you, even if I've not given you money. Let's appreciate that as well. Okay, I don't know that the time's up for me, but some thoughts.
I have one last question for you, and then I'll release you. And it is from Osei Prempe. He asks, what is your take on what a 69th independence actually means for Ghanaian women's agency, identity, and the authority over their own bodies?
Yeah, I saw Osei Prempe's question in the chat. It's, that's an entire thesis. I think that this particular week, I've been in a number of conversations, yesterday in an intergenerational one, and to hear some of the things that young women are going through, then you ask yourself, did we go or did we come? One of my older sisters said, oh, Chale, Abregu. It's like, we've done all this and young women are still struggling. I mentioned a phenomenon on campus where, and many of us who went to university here, my generation, and probably generation after me, it's like, okay, you're a woman, you have a boyfriend, either on campus or off campus, you might cook for him. Women cook for men. It's part of that. I have my own ideas about that. Cook for somebody that you love is fine, okay, if you're not being oppressed to do that. But where I want to go with this is that, yes, you be in a relationship, an intimate relationship with somebody, a man, he might give you chop money to cook and so on. What has happened now is that these study groups, let's say there are 4 women, there are 4 men or whatever, the men go and collect their po, right? I think everybody knows what that means. They go to the library, they go do the research. The women collect the money, so everybody puts 200 cedis on the table. They go to market, they come and cook. And then the evening, the study group meets. The men bring the intellectual work, the women bring the reproductive work. I'm like, where are we going? Like, why? So if you ask that young woman who may have normalized this, what independence means to her, maybe her sister who doesn't want to do this and who feels oppressed will tell you that independence, honestly, it may not mean that much for me. We must also admit that the women's movement has done so much, right? There was a time when you needed your husband's permission to get a passport. Long gone. I think there are probably young women who don't even know that there was something like that. We have a Domestic Violence Act. We have a Affirmative Action Act. We have more women graduating in many of the disciplines than young men. People are now up in arms and saying the boy child. So there has been some progress, but I think the area where we see the most misogyny is in the brazen kind of sexual harassment, the slapping a woman's bottom and thinking it's funny. And that why is she offended? I'm just playing with you small, no, then you vex. Like, why? And I think there's been some regression on that front, and it's global. So the manosphere, we don't have time to go into that. Toxic masculinity, we know. But if we have men in power, whether they are religious leaders, whether they're in the entertainment sector, whether they are presidents who've been convicted, but they managed to become presidents, and these people are out there, and it doesn't seem to matter that you can have, look at all the names in the Epstein files. How? So the message is that women do not matter. And that's global, because fortunately or unfortunately, what happens in one place, we see it in real time, right? And so it has recreated or there's a sense of masculine entitlement on steroids that we have to actively dismantle. And I think that the best way of dismantling this, that's why I said earlier that our brothers need to speak. We need the allies to speak. We don't just need you to agree with us and to love us. Yes. We need you to speak, because the young men will hear you more. if I'm in a room with young feminists and some young man says something, excuse me to say, stupid, they will eat him up alive. But if there's an older man with young boys or young men and they talk their, excuse me to say, rubbish, they may feel safer to do it, and I'm not saying it's right, but he can let them land, hear them out, ask them where they are coming from, and then have a conversation with them as to why that's not a good way to operate. And they can embrace that rather than us, yes, we have our places where we need to do that. We need to bring up our boys properly, but our brothers need to bring up the sons properly. And I think a lot of men, feminist men, look out for their daughters because they are worried that their daughters will struggle, and they sometimes forget that their sons also need to feel them. Last thing I'll say is that in a lot of the conversations I have with young men, I've been doing work on masculinity for years. When you ask them who their mentors and their examples are, they mention their mothers, their aunties, their grandmothers. Fathers, uncles are number two. Maybe there'll be a pastor. So if the mothers are the women are mentoring the women, and they are also mentoring the boys, then the men are unemployed in the social work and families. So we need you to step up. And I hope that answers Prempe's question. And I will slide out quietly at some point. Thank you so much.
Adumaku. This has been actually really riveting. We're completely over time, but we have so many questions. And I personally I'm loath to let Professor Quayson go without having finished my conversation with him. I have questions about where we can hear your full presentation. I think I'm going to suggest the Ghana Studies Association that, as we have a lot of questions here, that would encourage some of the conversations that we are saying the purpose of this webinar is to trigger, that perhaps we take the questions down, encourage people to put out more questions, and maybe have shorter sessions with each panelist who can then respond to these ideas and help guide the thinking, that the thirst for thinking that we have evoked, we must sustain. So perhaps Ghana's GSA will think about how to move on from here and keep the momentum going. Can I get any last words from my panelists? I'll start with you, Tracy. Just a few words because we're out of time.
I totally didn't see this coming, but I think we should consider a lot of things about Ghana's unique history and the different parts that are open to belonging, identity, but also like people. It's been 69 years going into 70. Although we're thinking independence within this, like for this theme, as like an ongoing process. And some people in the chat had said the same thing about thinking about independence as like not one-time event, but something that's still ongoing. There are continuities with 1957 and also pre-1957 that we have to tackle. And we can tackle those in intellectual spaces, but we can also tackle that in our politics and how that goes on it. And in all of this, representation also matters. I hope we get into a period or like a space as like a country where we are able to handle, like we can speak to what these like our historical continuities are with the present times. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Professor Bob-Milliar.
Right, thank you so much. Yes, my parting word would be that nation building is a project, it's ongoing, but that the involvement of all of us as citizens, as Ghanaians, is important for us to be able to build this project and to get the democratic dividends out of it. For now, the complaint among many citizens is that party politics hasn't actually delivered. And yes, that's a fair concern, because if you look at the way partisan politics in Ghana has played out, it has become something that competition for power is to access state resources and use those state resources for the betterment of what are called members of the clan. The political parties have eventually become clans, and you must be part of that clan to benefit from that kind of access to state power. This is worrying. And some of the issues about democratic decline is linked to how governing parties have behaved. And based on Ghana's own history of where we've come from, we've come to the realization that, yes, multi-party politics and the liberal political system is the most viable system that will see us realize the dreams and the aspirations of our founders. And that is what we need to keep at. And of course, everybody's involvement, especially citizens' involvement, is key to getting us to that point. That's what. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you very much, Professor Bob-Milliar. Professor Kwesi.
First of all, Mami, I want to commend you. You have made me, as a fellow Wolfian, very proud. You are an unobtrusive interlocutor, in the sense that you set things up for people to be able to talk, to shine. You've been a wonderful, discussant, wonderful. And I also want to praise the Ghana Studies Association for this brilliant idea, Bright, Kukua, all the people behind the scenes. It's long overdue that we met to basically to talk. We don't have these kinds of forums enough to talk. And the conversations today have been quite stimulating. I've gathered so many ideas and so on. And I completely endorse, Mami, your suggestion of individual sessions where we can address the questions that were asked. So high praise to Ghana Studies Association, magnificent. As the British Telecom advert used to have it, their slogan was, "It's good to talk."
Thank you very much,
It's good to talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kwesi, and thank you for the fans. I would like to ring us out by reminding you I hope my Ghana gear did not go unnoticed. The red, gold, green.
No, I didn't want to point at Charlie. Your duku is wild, but it's okay.
Thank you.
That's the first thing we saw. Yeah.
There's only one question that I'm going to answer myself from the audience, and it was about whether there's anything to celebrate after 69 years, given where we are economically. And I'm going to tell the person who asked this: if you have ever met a person who has had to add refugee to the identity that they have to carry, you would appreciate Ghanaian independence and what we have done with it. Perhaps we haven't got to the heights that we had all hoped we would get to 7 years after we got independent. Perhaps we were unrealistic. 69 years isn't that long, as His Excellency said, in the life of a country. So let us not give up hope. Let us not lose our pride in who we are. It is who we are. And there's plenty to fix about us, but there's also plenty to celebrate. So I'm going to ring it out, hanging us back over to the acting president of the GSA, with the one word that every Ghanaian everywhere knows. Charlie, happy Independence Day.
Thank you.
Over to you, Bright.
Thank you so much, Professor Mensah-Bonsu, for moderating this conversation. We're also deeply, deeply grateful to our panelists, Professor Akosua Ampofo, George Bob-Milliar, Tracy Mensah, and of course, my own mentor, Atokwesen, for their insightful commentary, as well as His Excellency John Dramani Mahama and His Excellency John Agyekum-Kufuor for their presidential messages and thoughtful contributions to this occasion. I also want to thank everybody who joined us from across Ghana and around the world. This could not have been achieved without the great, amazing team that I got to work with. And I do want to highlight each and every one of them by name. So bear with me here. We start off with Professor Emanuela Amoah, Professor Ishmael Annan, Professor Kukua Manfo, and of course, Bright Simmons for doing all the groundwork in Ghana, since most of us are based in Ghana. With the great conversations that we've had today, I want to remind everybody that it does not end here. Ghana Studies is here to stay, and we are bringing our conference to Kumasi, our 5th Ghana Studies Triennial Conference, which will take place this July from July 22nd to July 24th at KNUST. So we look forward to inviting y'all to join us as we continue to ensure that Ghana Studies remains and be the intellectual forum where scholars can come and engage in the discourses that shape national development. Thank you, and have a wonderful Independence Day. And we'll play some short videos as we close and exit. I'll turn over to the planning team.
My name is Ibrahim Mahama, and I'm making this video for the Ghana Studies Association for the webinar on the theme Ghana in Uncertain Times. And I'd like to focus on the question of culture, heritage, and artistic production, and also how we're able to expand on the history and sensibilities of culture, given the country that we find ourselves in. I've been very much interested in this idea of intervening within different cultural forms, whether architecture, textiles, archival materials. And one of the most interesting things have been the smock materials, which historically have been handwoven and then worn by many people across our beautiful country. But I think it's also very important for us to expand on it in terms of what it means, the languages that can be born out of it. A few years ago, I did a project called Purple Hibiscus, and the idea was to produce the smock material, but in such a form that it would be larger than life. Of course, most people only commission the smock weavers to make individual dresses for them to wear, but I'm very much interested in how we can take this simple language of a material, yet very complex in its weaving, and then produce it on such a scale that it's able to wrap a building. But I'm also very much interested in all the ghosts and inherent histories that are absorbed within the craft itself. So what does it mean for 1,000+ people to come together to be able to weave and stitch a material together within, let's say, a stadium which traditionally is used for playing football games? This time around, we're bringing the audience who ordinarily will be watching the game to be active participants within the game itself, which is actually quite very beautiful. And at the end of the day, you also imagine that when we're talking about redistribution, we have to imagine that whatever work that we're producing, we have to produce it first for ourselves, aside also producing it for the global stage. And I think that Ghana has been in a very interesting position historically in order to be able to use its cultural narratives, in order to be able to expand new forms and new meanings, and also inspire generations to come. And I think more so within times of uncertainty, that is the time that we can actually learn from our histories, our failures, and then we can be able to build new sensibilities out of it. After all, we need a generation that is not only imaginative, but a generation that is courageous. And I think that's the greatest gift that we can give through our artistic mediums.
Across Africa, you'll find democracies that tick every box. Competitive elections, vibrant media, loud civic voices. People vote governments in and vote them out. The rituals of accountability are performed with gusto. And yet, the roads still wash away. The dam never gets built. Petroleum levies and tax to restore oil refineries disappears into a fog of disputed accounting. Billions are pledged, summits convened, master plans launched, and then, remarkably little changes. This is the paradox at the heart of what we call catonomics. The theory begins with a distinction that sounds simple, but carries enormous weight. There are two forms of accountability in any democracy. The first is political accountability, the power of citizens to reward or punish leaders at the ballot box. In a growing number of African democracies, this is robust. Ghana has had 8 peaceful elections since 1992. Nigeria's voters regularly unseat incumbents. The second is policy accountability. the capacity of a society to motivate or even compel its government to design, execute, and refine technically sound programs, to insist on the details, the costings, the trade-offs, the follow-through. Here is the crux. You can have the first in abundance, while the second is almost entirely absent. And when that happens, you have a democracy that performs accountability without practicing it where it matters most. Why does this gap persist? Because politics and policy process the same raw material, social problems, in fundamentally opposite ways. Politics aggregates. It takes dozens of competing concerns, wages, education, trade, infrastructure, and compresses them into a single rallying cry. Jobs, development, transformation. This is how coalitions form, how elections are won, how